For 7 days, he ate, slept, and lived in the same house, with a dead body just a few feet away, and somehow no one noticed. No welfare check. No concerned neighbor knocking on the door. No Amber Alert. No missing persons report filed in time. Just silence, the kind of silence that hides things. The kind of silence that, once broken, leaves you questioning how well you really know the people living right next to you. Tonight, we're going deep into one of the most disturbing and psychologically complex cases I've ever covered. And I promise you, by the time this story is over, you will never look at a quiet house the same way again. Let's go back to the beginning. It was a Tuesday morning in late November. The kind of gray, bone-cold morning that England does better than anywhere else on Earth. The kind of morning where the fog sits low on the streets and the whole neighborhood feels half asleep. In a modest, semi-detached house on a quiet residential street in the East Midlands, a man we'll call Daniel, not his real name, for legal reasons, woke up, made himself a cup of tea, and went about his morning routine. He checked his phone, scrolled through the news, put 2 slices of bread in the toaster. Normal. Completely, unsettlingly normal. Except that just down the hall, behind a closed bedroom door, his flatmate was dead. And had been for almost 4 days at that point. Now before we go any further, if you're new here, this channel is where we cover the stories that don't make the front page. The cases that are strange, disturbing, and deeply human all at once. So if that's your thing, stick around. We go deep on every single one of these. And if you're already a regular, you already know the drill. Hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find these stories. Alright, back to Daniel. To understand what happened in that house, you have to understand who these 2 men were. Daniel was in his mid-30s, quiet, kept to himself. The kind of person his neighbors would describe, and later did describe, as perfectly pleasant and never any trouble. He worked remotely, doing data entry for a logistics company, which meant he was home. Almost always home. His flatmate, the man who died, we'll call him Robert. Robert was in his early 60s. A retired civil servant, widowed. He'd moved into the house about a year earlier after downsizing following his wife's passing. He didn't have much family nearby, a daughter in Vancouver, a brother in Brisbane. Both thousands of miles away, both with their own lives, both assuming Robert was ticking along just fine. And here's the first thing that should make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. No one had a reason to check on Robert. Not really. Because Robert, like so many people in that quiet, disconnected post-pandemic Britain, had become invisible. He wasn't the type to post on social media. He didn't go to a regular pub. He didn't have a job to miss him or a school run to notice his absence. He existed, as far as the outside world was concerned, within the 4 walls of that house. And in that house, the only witness was Daniel. The coroner would later determine that Robert died on a Friday evening. Natural causes. A sudden cardiac event. Quick, apparently, he likely felt very little. Daniel found him the following morning, Saturday. He knocked on Robert's bedroom door to ask if he wanted anything from the supermarket. No answer. Knocked again. Still nothing. Tried the handle. The door swung open. And there was Robert, slumped in his armchair, eyes slightly open. The television still on in the background. Now, here's where most of us, sitting safely in front of our screens right now, would say, obviously, you call 999. You call an ambulance. You do something. But Daniel didn't. And the question that this entire case hinges on, the question that haunted the inquest, the psychological evaluations, the courtroom, is simply why? Here's where I want to pause and put something to you directly. Imagine you're Daniel. You're not a violent person. You didn't cause this. You walk into that room and you find your flatmate, a man you've lived with for a year, a man you've had hundreds of cups of tea with, dead in his chair. You are alone. It is a Saturday morning. You are already a person who struggles with anxiety, with social situations, with the kind of phone calls that most of us dread, but get through anyway. What do? I genuinely want you to think about that. Drop it in the comments below, because the psychology of this case is just as disturbing as the facts. And the answers to that question say a lot more about human nature than most people are comfortable admitting. Because Daniel didn't call anyone. He closed the door. And he went back to the kitchen. And he finished making his tea. The days that followed were, by all accounts, some of the strangest ever documented in a British coroner's inquest. Daniel maintained his routine with almost robotic precision. He ordered his groceries online. He logged into work every morning at 9. He responded to emails. He watched television in the evenings. He did not enter Robert's room again. He did not open the curtains in that part of the house. He began, according to his own later testimony, to dissociate. To pretend, not consciously, but somewhere deep in the survival circuitry of his brain, that the door at the end of the hall simply didn't exist. Psychologists who later examined Daniel described this as an extreme stress-induced avoidance response. A kind of psychological shutdown that, while deeply disturbing on the surface, is actually more common than most people realize. The human brain, when confronted with something it cannot process, sometimes just doesn't. It draws a curtain. It moves on. It protects itself the only way it knows how. But understanding it doesn't make it any less terrifying. Because by day 3, the house had begun to change. The smell was the first thing. Faint at first, Daniel later said he convinced himself it was the bins or something in the fridge. He lit candles. He opened windows in other rooms. He told himself it would pass. It didn't pass. By day 5, neighbors were beginning to notice something was off, but not in the way you'd expect. Mrs. Calloway, from number 14, would later tell investigators that she'd seen Daniel in the front garden and thought he looked a bit peaky. She'd waved. He'd waved back. And that was that. No one asked. No one pushed. Because we don't, do we? We don't knock on doors anymore. We don't pry. We respect boundaries and privacy and personal space, and sometimes that quiet, polite, very British restraint allows the unthinkable to happen right under our noses. But here's the detail that no one could quite explain. And this is where I need you to pay close attention. Because this is the part of the case that the investigators kept coming back to, again and again, without a satisfying answer. Daniel had Robert's daughter's phone number. It was on a card pinned to the corkboard in the kitchen. He had seen it dozens of times. He walked past it every morning on his way to the kettle. He never called. Why? That is the question that the prosecution, the defense, and the coroner's court all circled around without ever fully landing on. And it's the question I want you to think about right now. Drop your theory in the comments. Was it guilt? Panic? Some deeper psychological fracture that none of the official reports captured? Because I've read everything available on this case and I still don't have a clean answer. And neither, apparently, did the jury. By day 6, something shifted. Robert's daughter, calling from Vancouver for what she described as a routine Sunday check-in, got no answer on her father's phone. She tried again an hour later, then again that evening. Then she called Daniel's number, which Robert had given her when he moved in, precisely for moments like this. Daniel answered on the 3rd ring. He told her Robert was out. He said he thought he'd gone to the shops. He said he'd let Robert know she called. He hung up, and then, according to his testimony, he sat on the kitchen floor and didn't move for 2 hours. Whatever wall he had built inside his mind was beginning to crack, because he knew, on some level he had always known. You can run from reality for 6 days. You cannot outrun it indefinitely. The next morning, day 7, Daniel called 999. He didn't speak at first when the operator picked up. The call logs show 11 seconds of silence before he said, very quietly, "I need to report a death." The operator asked him to confirm the address. He gave it. She asked him if the person was breathing. He said, "No, he hasn't been for a while." Police and paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They found the house in a state that one responding officer, in a statement later read into the inquest record, described as outwardly completely normal. Dishes washed, surfaces clean, the television on in the living room, and behind the door at the end of the hall, a scene that I will not describe in clinical detail out of respect for Robert and his family, that told the full, awful story of 7 days. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table when they arrived. He had made a pot of tea. He offered the officers a cup. He was, by all accounts, eerily calm. And he told them everything, methodically, precisely, without gaps. He didn't lie. He didn't minimize. He simply explained in a flat, quiet voice that he had found Robert, that he had panicked, and that he had not known how to come back from that first moment of not calling. The longer it went on, he told investigators, the more impossible it felt to explain. Every day that passed made the call harder to make, not easier. If you're still watching at this point, and I'm glad you are, do me one favor before we get to the outcome. Share this video with one person you know who loves a good, dark, true story. Not because it's entertainment exactly, but because this case deserves to be talked about. The questions it raises about isolation, about mental health, about how invisible we've all allowed each other to become. Those questions matter. Share it. Go on. Daniel was not charged with murder. He was not charged with manslaughter. The cause of Robert's death was confirmed as entirely natural. Nothing Daniel could have prevented, even if he'd called the moment he found him. What he was ultimately prosecuted for, and this is the part of English law that very few people are aware of, was failing to register a death within the legally required timeframe, combined with a secondary charge related to the distress caused to the deceased's family as a result of the delay. He received a suspended sentence, community service, a mandatory mental health assessment, and ongoing psychological support. The judge, in sentence, said something that I've been thinking about ever since I first read this case. She said, "This case is not a story of malice. It is a story of paralysis. And in some ways, that is more frightening, because paralysis can happen to anyone." Robert's daughter gave a victim impact statement. I won't read it in full, but one line has stayed with me. She said, "He didn't just lose 7 days. He lost 7 days of being found." And now, to close, because I want to hear from you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how deeply does this case disturb you? Not just the facts, but the idea of it, the ordinariness of it. The quiet street, the cup of tea, the card on the corkboard with a phone number that never got dialed, 1 being barely unsettled, 10 being you're sleeping with the lights on. Drop your number in the comments. And if you've got thoughts on Daniel, on what you think was really going on inside that house, inside that mind, I want to read every single one of them. Because this is the kind of case that doesn't end when the courtroom empties. It lives with you. It makes you look at the closed doors on your street differently. It makes you think about the people you haven't called in a while. Maybe do that. Call someone. I'll be back next week with another one. Stay curious, stay safe, and don't ignore the quiet houses.